The repairer is someone capable of mending anything, from weapons to ornaments, fixing any damage or distortion. It's a unique skill that goes beyond mere craftsmanship because within each object memories are woven. It is those memories that the repairer restores, and this is the story of such a repairer. A man slammed a piece of equipment onto the floor, declaring that nobody was going to buy such trash. He then addressed the young man standing before him, Lyle, with a sharp tone. Lyle appeared frightened, evident from the cold sweat forming on his face. The man continued, telling Lyle that he was only allowed to stay in the party out of pity because all he knew was how to repair things, nothing more. Raising his voice, the man yelled at Lyle, questioning how he could hand over such a shoddy shield for an S-rank mission. Lyle, though visibly shaken, challenged him, asking what was so shady about the shield. He reminded the party leader that the very same shield had deflected a wyvern attack that day and saved them during the A-rank mission a few days ago, all thanks to his repair skills. Hearing this, the party leader grew even angrier, shouting that Lyle couldn't even fight and was just a burden in the party. He claimed that anyone could repair things like Lyle and dismissed his contributions as worthless. Lyle, though upset by the insult, remained composed. He had been repairing weapons and parts to raise money for his own shop, and hearing his efforts called crappy stung. The party leader snapped him out of his thoughts, yelling that his time in the party was over and declared that Lyle was out for good. Despite the shock, with his eyes widening and more sweat forming on his chin, Lyle kept his cool demeanor and replied calmly, accepting his fate. The party leader, still furious, told him to leave immediately. Lyle turned back one last time, thanking him for everything before leaving with a calm and collected face. This surprised the party leader, though he quickly brushed it off with a sigh as if he'd just dealt with a nuisance. After Lyle had left the Adventurers Guild, where several men were drinking, an adventurer with flowing long hair, easily mistaken for a woman, picked up the shield the party leader had slammed earlier. Admiring it, he commented on how incredible the shield was. The party leader, shocked by the statement, asked what the man meant. The adventurer, still holding the shield close, replied that he had heard it deflected a wyvern attack. He gently caressed the shield and asked if it belonged to the party leader. The leader confirmed that it did and mentioned that the guy he had just kicked out made it, adding that he no longer needed it. The long-haired man, hearing this, remarked that in that case he would take the shield. He then left, leaving the party leader puzzled. Watching the adventurer with long hair walk away, the party leader muttered to himself about how strange the man was, wondering why anyone would bother with what he considered trash. But as he returned to his drink, a faint memory stirred, making him feel as though he had seen this man before. Shrugging it off, he dismissed the thought, thinking it didn't really matter, and resumed enjoying his drink. Lyle was seen walking home. Deep in thought as he walked, he muttered to himself, wondering if any party would ever want a non-combatant like him again. He remembered how his former party member had yelled at him at the guild, calling him a burden. The harsh words rang in his mind, the reminder that his amateur repairs were considered worthless. He stopped by a bench, sat down with his belongings, and rested his chin on his hands. He sat there, lost in thought, questioning whether he had really been doing his best. What should he do now? He told himself he was still short on funds, and though he had been getting closer to his dream of owning his own shop, that hope seemed distant now after being kicked out of the party. Suddenly, someone called out to him from afar, addressing him as Mr. Repairman. It turned out to be the man with long hair, the one who had picked up the shield the party leader had deemed trash. The man approached and asked Lyle if he would be willing to take on a job. Lyle, a bit surprised by how radiant the man looked, wondered if he was an adventurer. The man then extended a sword in its sheath toward Lyle. Shocked, Lyle couldn't help but wonder how this stranger knew he specialized in weapons. The man told Lyle to name his price, stating he'd like the sword fixed. Lyle took the sword and led the man to his workshop, placing the sword on the workbench. The man with the long hair introduced himself as Rindo, and Lyle, now wearing his custom-made apron, asked if the sword held sentimental value for Rindo. The man confirmed, saying Lyle could think of it that way. As Lyle carefully removed the sword from its sheath, he remarked on how much the sword had been used, but noted that it had certainly been well cared for. As he observed the weapon more closely, his eyes were drawn to a faded family crest on the handle. This discovery made Lyle's eyes light up, and he became more eager to begin the repair. Rindo, noticing how Lyle's face lit up, seemed surprised by the sudden change in his demeanor. Lyle then told Rindo that given the sword's age, he might not be able to restore it to perfection. But if Rindo insisted, Lyle promised to do his utmost best. Rindo, with a slight bow that caused his long hair to fall over his face, replied that it was perfectly fine by him, leaving the sword in Lyle's hands. Lyle assured him that it would be done, and he began the repair. As Lyle worked, carefully removing the sword completely from its sheath, memories of his past flooded his mind. He recalled how, as a child, he would run into his grandfather's workshop with excitement. His grandfather, buried in work with his gray hair, glasses, and apron, would always tell him that if he stayed too long, his father would scold him. Yet Lyle would eagerly rush toward him with a bright face, greeting him with enthusiasm. One day, he picked up a glittering item and told his grandfather how pretty it was, asking if he had made it. His grandfather sighed, telling him that he didn't make things, he repaired them. Lyle had been confused at the time, thinking his grandfather was a maker of beautiful items, but that day he learned what it meant to repair. The old man simply explained that he mended various items, restoring their color, shape, and the memories imbued within them. As he spoke, he stared intently at the necklace in his hand, while little Lyle listened with a flustered expression, his face red in excitement and awe at what his grandfather did. With wide eyes and a flushed face, Lyle suddenly exclaimed that he wanted to try it himself. His grandfather smiled and sat him on a chair, teaching him some basic repair techniques as a child. Lyle snapped out of this memory, returning to the present as he picked up his needle-like tool and began working on the sword. Using various instruments, he covered his nose, hammering the blade, placing it into the furnace, and carefully using a special magic circle on paper to enhance the repair. After hours of work, the sword gleamed, shiny, and restored to its former glory. Lyle stood back, feeling satisfied with his work, his face drenched in sweat, smiling despite his exhaustion. The sight of the sword made him shout with pride, pleased with how well the restoration had turned out. The next day, Rindo came to collect his sword. When Lyle handed it to him, he was shocked by the large sum Rindo offered as payment. Lyle froze, almost shivering, a bead of sweat forming on his face. Rindo noticed his strange reaction and asked if something was wrong. Lyle, still in shock, asked if Rindo was sure about the amount, mentioning that it seemed far too much. With a carefree attitude and a faint smile, Rindo reassured him, saying that Lyle had done exceptional work deserving of a generous reward. Even though Lyle hadn't fully recovered from the shock of such a large payment, he thanked Rindo, saying he was glad he could help. Curious, Lyle asked why Rindo had chosen him for this job. Rindo explained that he had seen Lyle in the tavern the day he was fired from his party. This brought back the unpleasant memory of how his party leader had called him useless and told him that his time in the group was over. Lyle's fist curled unconsciously, reacting to the bitterness of the memory. Rindo then asked if Lyle remembered the shield he had repaired, commenting that while it looked heavily used, it had no significant fresh damage. He added that the shield's resilience to deflect monster attacks was of the highest quality and that no ordinary repair could achieve such a result. Rindo speculated that Lyle must have trained extensively, asking if that was the case. Hearing all these compliments, Lyle felt flustered. He humbly replied that he still considered himself a novice, especially compared to the repairman he admired most, his grandfather. Lyle went on to explain that the precious workshop he worked in had been left to him by his grandfather, who had been a skilled repairman as well. He mentioned how the place was filled with cherished memories of his grandfather, but admitted that the workshop's capabilities were limited. Lyle expressed his desire to improve his skills further, saying that his next goal was to open his own shop as the first step in his journey. Rindo listened closely, observing the passion and fire in Lyle's words. As he stared at the sword Lyle had restored, lying before him on the table, Rindo spoke. He explained that the sword had been left to him by his late father, recalling how Lyle had noticed the fading crest on the hilt. Lyle's face had lit up at the sight, recognizing the significance of the sword. Rindo continued, reflecting on how he had used the sword flamboyantly. In his rookie adventurer days, which left it quite worn out. He admitted he thought he wouldn't be able to use the sword anymore as he reached for it, then expressed his gratitude for Lyle's skill in mending it. Rindo ran his hand along the blade, remarking that Lyle had woven together the emotions he had inherited from his father. Hearing this, Lyle's face lit up in shock, surprised at how deeply Rindo expressed his feelings. This triggered a flashback to Lyle's childhood when he sat on his grandfather's lap, both laughing together. His grandfather patted his head, explaining that repair wasn't just about fixing things, it was about preserving the memories imbued in them. That was when Lyle first made up his mind to become a repairman like his grandfather, determined to mend not just objects but the memories tied to them. His resolve, now clear, reflected in his bold and confident expression. With excitement in his eyes, Lyle thanked Rindo for entrusting him with such a precious sword. Rindo smiled, his eyes closed, saying he should be the one thanking Lyle. He then casually asked if Lyle believed his dream would come true. Standing up, Lyle threw his hands in the air in celebration, animatedly exclaiming with a huge grin that he would definitely make his dream come true. Rindo returned the smile, eyes closed, remarking that Lyle would probably get even busier from now on. Lyle, confused by the comment, guessed so as Rindo left. A few days later, deep within a high-difficulty dungeon, a dragon loomed over a group of adventurers. They stood at the entrance, panic evident on their faces, unable to believe they were about to face such a fearsome creature. Their bodies were drenched in sweat, eyes wide and mouths open in disbelief. This group was none other than Rindo's party. As the dragon roared violently, preparing to breathe fire, Rindo stepped forward confidently. His long hair flowed behind him as his party members nervously warned that their current gear wasn't enough to take down a dragon, urging him to retreat. But Rindo paid no attention. With a smooth motion, he stylishly drew the sword Lyle had repaired from its sheath on his hip. The pressure between Rindo and the dragon intensified, his hair blowing back as he prepared to strike. Just as the dragon opened its massive jaws, fangs bared ready to unleash a fiery attack, one of Rindo's teammates warned that he was being reckless. Focused entirely on the battle, Rindo didn't respond. Another party member, a mage, cautioned him again, insisting he couldn't handle a dragon with such a flimsy sword. Rindo, undeterred, kept his stern expression as he launched himself at the dragon in a swift motion, striking just before the beast could release its fiery breath. In a single, precise blow, the sword once dismissed as flimsy cut the dragon clean in half, ending the monstrous creature's life instantly. His teammates, 2 girls, stood frozen in shock, their faces quickly covered in cold sweat. One muttered that it couldn't be possible. Rindo, with a smile on his face, looked at the sword he had just used to slay the dragon. It was the very sword Lyle had repaired. Smiling, he remarked to himself that just as he thought, Lyle was truly something special. Lyle's shop was soon flooded with customers, each entering with their repair requests. Lyle greeted them with an excited smile, welcoming them to his shop Repair the Memories. A few days later, Rindo entered Lyle's bustling shop and Lyle warmly welcomed him, greeting him with the same cheerful energy. As Rindo approached, he commented on how busy Lyle's shop had become, mentioning that he had hesitated to come in earlier because there were always so many customers. Lyle responded, attributing much of his success to Rindo, explaining that he used the space both as a workshop and a store, even though it was a bit cramped due to its connection to his atelier. Rindo nodded in understanding, remarking that it seemed convenient to have things set up that way. Smiling, he noted that business was clearly thriving for Lyle and mentioned that his promotion had worked wonders. This left Lyle stunned, prompting him to ask what Rindo meant by promotion. Rindo casually revealed that he was the leader of an SSS-ranked adventure party and had recommended Lyle's services to his fellow adventurers. Lyle was taken aback by this revelation, beads of cold sweat forming on his face as he realized why his shop had been so busy despite just opening. He thought to himself that he had always sensed something different about Rindo, but the extent of his influence was overwhelming. Snapping out of his thoughts, Lyle stammered as he addressed Rindo, still trying to process the weight of the information. Realizing how important Rindo was, Lyle bowed his head, thanking him profusely for his support. However, beneath his gratitude, he felt a growing nervousness, evidenced by the cold sweat beneath his eyelid, but worry that too much praise might lead to overwhelming expectations from nobles and other influential people, which could end up being more than he could handle. Just then, a new customer entered, snapping Lyle out of his thoughts. The man addressed him as Mr. Repairman, asking if Lyle could take another job for him today. Lyle quickly refocused and replied that he could, but kindly asked Rindo if he could wait while he attended to the new customer. Rindo smiled genuinely, assuring Lyle that he didn't mind waiting. As Rindo waited, he observed the shop and muttered to himself that it was quite impressive to have repeat customers in such a short time. Smiling, he thought that at this rate, he felt confident leaving the task to Lyle. A young girl then appeared from behind Rindo, her face showing clear impatience as she asked how long Rindo planned to keep her waiting. Rindo apologized to her, but the girl's expression remained upset, hinting at her frustration. She was dressed in fine, expensive fabrics that radiated elegance, making one wonder who this new client might be. Lyle thanked the man who had just made a request, expressing gratitude for his patronage. As the man left, Lyle wiped his forehead, letting out a sigh of relief, feeling that things had finally settled down. He was now ready to give Rindo his full attention. That was when he noticed the young lady standing beside Rindo, dressed elegantly, exuding an air of nobility. Her presence piqued his curiosity as he wondered what this mysterious girl's request might be. Lyle greeted her warmly and offered both her and Rindo a seat to discuss matters further. He then asked if the client today was not Rindo, but the young lady standing before him, causing the girl to become visibly upset. The young lady, clearly offended, demanded to know how Lyle dared to address her as little girl, especially since he was merely a commoner. With a stern expression, she introduced herself as a Shah, continuing in the same harsh tone as she ordered Rindo to behead Lyle for the insult. Lyle, shocked by her words, froze in place, realizing this noble girl had just referred to him as a commoner and was demanding his execution. Sweat began to beat on his forehead as panic set in. Rindo, with a sly laugh, gently asked Shah to calm down and introduced Lyle as the owner of Repair the Memories, assuring her that Lyle was a highly skilled repairman he personally recommended. Lyle, still rattled by the situation, asked if Rindo had really referred to him as skilled, humbly denying such praise and introducing himself as Lyle Desquile. He expressed his pleasure in meeting Shah, but her cold stare remained fixed on him, showing clear displeasure. Lyle felt even more confused by her demeanor. Shah, still stern, mentioned that she wouldn't have come if not for Rindo's recommendation. She then placed a small dress on the table between them, catching Lyle off guard. Lyle recognized it as a child's dress but couldn't understand why Shah had brought it. He politely asked what the significance of the dress was. Upon closer inspection, Lyle observed that it was quite old, torn, and out of shape. Shah, with a frosty tone, asked if he couldn't tell just by looking at it, stating flatly that it was indeed a dress. Lyle, attempting to lighten the tense atmosphere, chuckled and clarified that he knew it was a dress, but his question had meant something deeper. Shah's expression hardened further as she demanded to know what exactly Lyle was implying, insisting he be concise and take the matter seriously. Sensing her frustration, Lyle let out a nervous laugh, realizing she wasn't an easy person to approach. Rindo then stood up, explaining that the dress had belonged to Shah's mother when she was a child. Lyle, shocked, asked more about her mother, and as he looked at the dress again, he realized it was made by a highly skilled artisan. Despite its damaged state, the craftsmanship was evident. Lyle asked Rindo why they had brought it to him, but before Rindo could explain, Shah interrupted, saying it was enough. She maintained her stern expression as she stood to leave, instructing Lyle to repair the dress promptly. She closed her eyes with finality as she delivered her request, stating that would be all. Lyle, watching her, wondered why she had behaved so coldly towards him. Asha turned away, announcing that she would excuse herself now. Rindo, following her lead, told Lyle they would be leaving for the day. As Asha exited, Lyle noticed that she seemed to be in a hurry, making him wonder if there was a deeper reason behind her brusque behavior. As he prepared to remove the damaged dress from the table, Lyle was startled when Rindo re-entered the shop. Surprised, he exclaimed Rindo's name. As the two of them sat down once more, with Lyle apologizing for stopping Rindo so suddenly, Rindo replied, telling Lyle not to apologize, admitting that he was at fault for trying to leave without explaining the situation. Noticing the confusion on Lyle's face, Rindo asked what was troubling him. Lyle expressed that he was genuinely curious about why Asha had been in such a hurry, adding that it might sound presumptuous. He explained that as a repairman, his role wasn't just about fixing objects. It was about understanding the emotions and stories behind them. Lyle recalled his grandfather teaching him this important lesson, which he then shared with Rindo. This is why he wanted to fully comprehend the meaning behind the damaged dress. Rindo acknowledged Lyle's curiosity and began explaining. He revealed that he and Asha met years ago during a bodyguard mission and that he has known Asha's mother, Miranda, ever since. Miranda, the owner of the damaged dress, has been suffering from an incurable disease for years, and her condition worsens every day. As Rindo spoke, Lyle's eyes widened in shock, his mouth agape and cold sweat forming on his brow, clearly shaken by the terrible news. Rindo continued, explaining that Asha had been upset earlier due to her mother's condition. Bowing slightly, Rindo apologized on Asha's behalf for her rudeness and asked Lyle to forgive her. Lyle, shocked by the apology from such a prestigious man, exclaimed in surprise but quickly assured Rindo that there was no need to apologize, saying it was understandable given the circumstances. He then brought up the dress, to which Rindo explained that the dress held deep sentimental value for Miranda. It was a gift from someone very dear to her. This revelation surprised Lyle, and Rindo continued by telling him that Miranda had worn the dress almost daily as a child, and despite its wear and tear, had it repaired repeatedly by renowned artisans. Rindo asked if Lyle could lend his expertise in restoring the dress, which Lyle realized was not only Asha's wish but Rindo's as well. Lyle, with a determined expression, confidently assured Rindo that he would take care of the repairs. Rindo smiled faintly and thanked Lyle, saying he was counting on him. Lyle, now nervous with a bead of sweat trailing down his face, admitted that he had a concern. He realized that this type of repair was precisely the kind of memory restoration his grandfather used to talk about, but this particular dress was unusually damaged. Lyle commented that the dress was so old and worn that he couldn't tell what it originally looked like. He added that he would need to ask Miranda for details, but given her current condition, that wouldn't be possible. Rindo agreed. Thinking further, Lyle suddenly remembered that Rindo mentioned the dress had been repaired by a renowned artisan before, prompting him to ask more about it. Rindo confirmed that Miranda had indeed told him that. Lyle, lost in thought, began to wonder if the renowned repairman might be someone he knew, realizing that the answer might be closer than he thought. Snapping out of his thoughts, he thanked Rindo for his help, telling him that he might have found a lead. Several days later, Lyle was seen walking through the streets deep in thought. He felt confident that he could recreate the dress, but he was still missing key details. Holding a piece of paper in his hand, he thought to himself that Asha would definitely be furious if she knew he had asked Rindo for her address. As he continued walking, Lyle noted that Asha's house should be nearby. He turned a corner and spotted a massive building, realizing that this was no ordinary home. Lyle wondered who or what exactly Asha was to be living in such a grand place. Lyle approached the man at the gate, nervously asking for permission to enter. The man, tall with a stern expression, demanded to know what business he had there. With a shaky voice, Lyle introduced himself as Lyle Disguise, explaining that he was the repairman commissioned for the damaged dress. Just as he was speaking, Asha appeared, shocked to see him at her house. Lyle hadn't expected her to arrive and quickly tried to reassure the butler that he wasn't someone suspicious, saying he only had something important to ask her. Asha, clearly startled, demanded to know what Lyle was doing at her house, her tone sharp. Though terrified of her, Lyle felt a slight relief seeing her. Asha, her voice full of disbelief, asked how Lyle had dared to suddenly show up unannounced, wondering aloud if Rindo had given him her address. She pressed him further, asking if she was wrong. Lyle, apologizing sincerely, explained that he needed to ask her something. With a cold but controlled voice, Asha questioned what it was he needed to know. She dismissed the guard, thanking him, and focused on Lyle, waiting for his explanation. Lyle reached into his bag and pulled out a drawing of a dress. Explaining that he had tried to recreate it based on past repair records, he pointed out a spot on the sleeve where it seemed some sort of jewelry or ornament had once been attached. Showing the drawing to Asha, he noticed her expression shift, her cold eyes widening in surprise. There was a brief moment where something seemed to pass through her, a feeling she couldn't quite place. Lyle continued, saying that he wanted to restore the dress as closely to the original as possible for her mother, explaining that this was the reason he had come to ask about the missing part. Despite searching through all the jewelry stores in town, he couldn't find the right piece. He thought asking Ashad directly would yield better results. Ashad took the paper from him, asking if he had really checked every store in town. Her tone was still harsh, but there was a hint of disbelief in her voice as she asked how many stores he thought there were. Lyle, sensing her skepticism, told her that if she had any idea about the missing piece, she should let him know, assuring her that until then he would keep searching. With that, he left, and Ashad stood silently, clenching the paper tightly in her hand. She was suddenly flooded with a memory from her childhood, recalling a time when she asked her mother why she didn't throw away the tattered dress. Her mother had replied that the dress held precious memories. Confused, Ashad had asked what she meant, and her mother, with a flustered expression, told her that it was too early to explain. At that moment, Ashad had noticed the brooch on the dress, hanging loosely, about to fall off. Her mother gently removed the ornament and handed it to her, saying that if it fell, it might be lost forever. She told Ashad that one day she would grow into a beautiful woman and meet someone wonderful. Snapping out of the memory, Ashad went to retrieve the ornament, holding it tightly in her hand. Without a word, she left the mansion. Back at his shop, Lyle sat frustrated. Unable to find the missing piece, despite knowing he was so close to completing the dress, he could feel time slipping away, pushing him to search all night. As he focused on his work, a voice startled him. He turned, shocked to see Ashad standing there. The late hour made her unexpected visit even more surprising. Ashad bowed her head, apologizing for intruding at such a time. She admitted it was impolite to come after commissioning the work, but couldn't help asking why Lyle was going to such lengths for someone else's dress. Lyle, looking at her with resolve, explained that he wanted to see her happy. As Ashad and Lyle continued their conversation, Ashad handed him the final piece of the ornament, allowing him to complete the dress. Once it was finished, she hurried away, leaving Lyle concerned, prompting him to chase after her. Meanwhile, at Ashad's home, the maids gathered around Miranda, who lay on her deathbed. Her husband held her tightly, pleading for her not to give up as she hovered between life and death. With a sorrowful expression, Ashad's father wondered aloud where Ashad could be during such a crucial time. Moments later, Ashad entered the room, elegantly dressed in her mother's gown. She walked gracefully to her mother's side, with Lyle and Rindo present. Miranda's pale face brightened upon seeing Ashad in her childhood dress, a soft smile appearing. Ashad, holding back tears, told her mother how proud she was to be her daughter. She recalled the words her mother had spoken to her when she was young, words about becoming an adult. Ashad admitted that she still didn't fully understand what her mother meant, but promised she would one day grow into a wonderful woman just like her. Holding her mother's hand gently, Ashad spoke these words, her voice trembling. Miranda, weakened, gave up her final breath, and Ashad carefully placed her mother's hand back on the bed, begging her to watch over her as she pursued her happiness. Seeing her mother's lifeless body, Ashad wept bitterly, commenting on how beautiful her mother looked even in death. As she cried, Ashad's father had a sudden flashback of his childhood with Miranda, recalling the joyous moments they had shared. He remembered her wearing the very same dress Ashad now wore, memories of them reading together and playing in the fields. He had often made her bouquets and crowns of flowers, things that had genuinely made her happy. Reflecting on their joyful past, he silently thanked Miranda for the precious memories they had created together. Several days later, Ashad visited Lyle's shop. Lyle, surprised by her appearance, greeted her warmly and offered her a seat. After sitting down, Ashad bowed her head, apologizing for her rude behavior during their last encounter. She thanked Lyle deeply for his help, expressing gratitude for mending her mother's dress. With sincerity, she handed Lyle a sealed letter. Confused, Lyle asked what it was, and Ashad explained that it was one of the important items her mother had left behind. She felt it would be best to give it to him. Lyle, taken aback, opened the letter and began to read. As he went through the letter, his earlier suspicions were confirmed. It was a letter written by Why Miranda, addressed to a certain repairman named Laud Disguise, Lyle's grandfather. The letter contained an apology for Miranda's absence at Laud's funeral, as well as heartfelt thanks for all the kindness he had shown her throughout his life. The revelation struck Lyle deeply, confirming what he had suspected all along, that his grandfather was indeed the famous repairman Rindo had spoken of. Lyle realized that his grandfather had mended the very same dress countless times. Ashad then told Lyle that all they ever wanted was to protect those precious memories. She admitted that at first she had doubted him, explaining that entrusting her mother's treasured memories to someone else made her feel anxious. She confessed she wasn't sure if what she was doing was right or wrong, but she believed her mother must have felt the same. Lyle, with a bright smile, assured her that he understood, and Ashad pointed out with a teasing tone that she thought she had told him to stop addressing her so formally. She reminded him that if they were going to continue on friendly terms, he should simply call her Ashad. Her stern words carried a bit of a playful edge, though she didn't intend to come across as harsh, which made Lyle nervous, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Lyle, trying to ease the tension, remarked that Ashad had never mentioned being the daughter of a duke, and she smiled, saying it hadn't come up before. Scratching his head nervously, Lyle replied that it made sense, thinking to himself that Asha always had an air of importance, but he never would have guessed she was from a noble family. Now, everything about the mansion made sense to him, something he had been wondering about all along. Thanks to both Rindo and Asha, Lyle's shop was beginning to flourish. Reflecting on how much Rindo had helped him with numerous requests, recommendations, and promotions, Lyle knew simple thanks wouldn't be enough to express his gratitude. Asha handed Lyle another piece of clothing, pleading with him to complete the dress from her mother's memories. She entrusted him with this new request, urging him to accept it. Lyle, with a soft smile, agreed, saying if she insisted, he would take on the task, promising to stay in touch. Asha's face brightened, turning slightly red, and Lyle smiled back at her, his cheeks also tinged with a bit of color as their bond deepened like old friends. Just as Lyle was about to comment on something else, he asked where Rindo might be. Asha was about to answer when they were interrupted by a voice at the shop entrance. A rough-looking young boy appeared, asking to be excused. Lyle greeted him, asking what the matter was, and the boy held out a small piece of ornament, begging Lyle to repair it. The ornament was carefully wrapped in a dirty handkerchief, and Lyle took it gently, examining it closely. He wanted to ask more questions about the item, but before he could say a word, the boy dashed out of the shop, promising to pay him and shouting that he was counting on Lyle. Lyle stood there, stunned by the boy's sudden departure, watching as the young rowdy boy ran off without giving him a chance to ask anything further. Asha, gazing at the piece of ornament, fell into deep thought. Her fingers pressed against her lips as she contemplated its significance. She felt as though she had seen it somewhere before, and Lyle, noticing her distracted expression, commented that the hairpin ornament seemed to be weighing on her mind. Asha confirmed this, saying there was indeed something about the hairpin that caught her attention. Lyle mused that considering it had been brought by a boy. It made him wonder if it belonged to the boy's mother. Asha agreed, saying it was definitely a possibility. She was frank in her thoughts, analyzing the situation and noting that something felt strange, particularly judging by how the boy who brought the hairpin was dressed. He seemed to come from a slum, while the hairpin exuded an air of royalty. Lyle snapped her out of her reverie, pointing out that although the hairpin was broken, he could tell it had been made with relatively expensive materials. Asha then asked Lyle. He thought the hairpin might be stolen. He paused for a moment before replying, acknowledging that it wasn't uncommon for impoverished individuals to resort to crime for survival. However, he didn't believe that was the case here, explaining that the boy had looked earnest as he pleaded for its repair. Seeing Lyle's genuine concern displayed in his expression, Asha decided to trust his judgment. She told him that in that case he should allow her to help, as she would see if she could find out where the hairpin had come from. Lyle was taken aback, his mouth falling open in shock, his face flushed with excitement at the prospect. The next day, Asha was seen talking to herself, affirming that she had come too far to turn back now. She supposed that was true and decided to move forward, finding herself at Elta Castle. Lost in thought, she pondered where she had seen the ornament before, resting her hands on her chin as she concentrated. She opened a well-worn book filled with past readings, familiar portraits, and searched everywhere she could think of, even in her own home. Yet nothing matched the hairpin's design. Determined to help Lyle, she realized she still had quite some time before her father finished his business with the king. As she wandered around the castle, she spotted the back of a lady she recognized as Princess Fran. Asha moved closer to the young lady, who appeared to be talking to the air, and greeted her with a good afternoon, hoping she wasn't interrupting. The princess turned to Asha with a bright smile, addressing her as Asha Oni, and said it was good to see her again. This was Princess Fran Elta Elastio, the royal of the Kingdom of Elta. Curious, she asked what Asha was doing there, to which Asha replied that her father had arrangements with the king, and she had decided to take a stroll in the meantime. Bowing her head politely, Asha inquired if she might ask what Fran was doing, pointing to the air and talking to what seemed like nothing. Fran replied that she was talking to a little flower fairy, and Asha smiled at the princess, saying that sounded fun. Fran continued her conversation with what seemed like empty air to Asha, who realized that the princess must be engaging with fairies again, as she always claimed. In her mind, Asha dismissed the idea that something like that could actually exist. She stared at the princess, who noticed Asha's gaze and asked if something was the matter. Asha apologized, saying she was caught up in her thoughts. In reality, she was staring at the royal hairpin perched on the princess's head, which looked strikingly similar to the one brought to Lyle's shop for repair. Upon hearing Asha's response, the princess's bright smile faded, replaced by a blank expression as she wondered what Asha wanted to ask about her hairpin. At the same time, Lyle was seen walking through the slums, still in his workshop apron, muttering to himself that the boy must be somewhere around there. He followed the general direction the boy had run toward and, as expected, found himself in a complex area of the slums. Lyle concluded he probably wouldn't find the boy who brought the hairpin to his shop right away. As he wandered through the slum, he spotted two kids beating up another boy named Tenya, taunting him for always muttering to himself and calling him creepy. They kicked and hit Tenya, demanding he hand over the hairpin, saying it was a waste for someone like him to possess something so expensive. Tenya shouted back defiantly, refusing to give in to their demands, insisting that he would never part with it for the likes of them. His response only angered the boys further, who mocked him as a coward. Just as they were about to land another blow on Tenya, Lyle intervened, stepping in to shield him from the attack. One of the boys, surprised, asked who Lyle was. Tenya was shocked to see the repairman come to his rescue, realizing how unexpected it was to see him here. Lyle confronted the two boys, declaring himself a friend of Tenya's and warning them that if they tried to hurt him again, he wouldn't stand by and watch. Hearing this, the boys grew scared and fled the scene. Once they left, Lyle turned to Tenya, apologizing for showing up out of nowhere and introducing himself. He offered his hand to Tenya, who grabbed it gratefully as Lyle pulled him up from the ground. Lyle then asked what had happened with those boys. Tenya, his face bruised from the beating, explained that they stole things to make a living and had recognized the hairpin's value. He added that the hairpin had broken the last time they tried to steal it from him, which had sparked their anger. Lyle commented, noting that that was what had happened, but it seemed Tenya refused to be complicit in these bad deeds. Tenya replied that the fairies would be very angry with him if he did that, leaving Lyle shocked that Tenya had just mentioned the fairies. Curious, he asked what Tenya meant by that. Suddenly, he remembered those boys saying that Tenya was always muttering to himself, calling him creepy. Tenya explained that he had been able to hear the voices of fairies since he was born, and that everyone thought he was strange because of it. He guessed that Lyle would probably think he was crazy too. Tenya continued, sharing that his parents had died, leaving him all alone and people didn't treat him well. He insisted that no matter what anyone said, the hairpin was the one thing he did not want to give up. In response, Lyle placed his gloved hand on Tenya's head, gently patting him and reassuring him that he believed him, adding that he did not think Tenya was creepy. Although the hairpin had ended up broken, Lyle acknowledged that Tenya had tried to protect it with all his might. He told Tenya he thought he was really brave, which made Tenya emotional, and he started to cry. Lyle then revealed that he had come here because he wanted to ask Tenya more about the hairpin. Tenya apologized for leaving so quickly without giving Lyle an explanation. He mentioned that since Lyle believed him, he would tell him everything, and he began describing a mysterious girl he had met recently who could also see the fairies. They were both surprised to find out they could interact with fairies, and after exchanging names, Tenya asked Fran if she had come to town to spend the day but had ended up getting lost after her adult asked her if that was correct. Fran confirmed this, and Tenya inquired if this was her first time there, noting that he didn't usually see people dressed the way she was. Fran replied that it was not her first time getting lost, but it was her first time here, saying she followed the fairies which led her to this place. With a sad expression, she commented that she was sure her adult was looking for her. Taking her hands, Tenya assured her he would help her get back to her adult friends. He led her through the slums until they found her escorts, who were thrilled to see her, asking where she had been, clearly relieved. Before leaving, gave Tenya a hairpin to clip back his hair, which made him incredibly happy. Fran thanked him for his help and commented that Tenya had a cute face, suggesting he should show it off. This caught Tenya off guard. Being called cute by a girl felt surreal. He told Fran that the hairpin looked expensive and that he couldn't accept it. In response, smiled and said she would lend it to him, telling him to come back and return it one day. Meanwhile, Lyle, overhearing the conversation, informed Tenya that he understood. He then asked if Tenya knew where the girl who gave him the hairpin was, speculating that since they could speak to the fairies, they must have a way of communicating through them. With a sad expression, Tenya replied that he could meet her, explaining that Fran was the princess of this kingdom. Lyle was shocked to hear this, realizing that they had communicated with each other through the fairies. Tenya lamented that he did not have the social standing to see her, emphasizing that while Fran was a princess, he was merely an orphan. He expressed that under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have even been able to reach her. Then he recalled how Fran had told him through the fairies that someday, when he became a self-made man, he would return to her with a hairpin, which filled him with happiness. It meant a lot to him that Fran believed he would fulfill this promise. Lyle acknowledged this and realized there was only one thing he could do for Tenya: repair the hairpin. He told Tenya that seeing how much effort he was willing to put into changing his situation made him ready to help, ensuring that Tenya's feelings were conveyed to Fran. Grateful, Tenya thanked Lyle, who then offered to introduce him to someone who could help him later on. As Lyle and Ashad discussed the matter, Ashad commented that it seemed they had taken quite the chore on. Lyle asked if Fran felt the same way about Tenya, to which Ashad replied that Fran believed Tenya would come to see her one day and would always be waiting until then. Lyle remarked that the two of them had statuses that were polar opposites, yet they happened to hear the fairies and met by coincidence, suggesting they might be part of real-life fairy tales. As they continued their conversation, Rindo and Tenya entered, with Tenya wearing a bright smile as he announced that he was going with Rindo today to complete his first commission since becoming an adventurer. He handed a weapon to Lyle, asking him to repair it for him. Both Lyle and Ashad accepted the request. Meanwhile, an elven figure was seen. Vowing never to forgive the despicable repairman, as he placed his hand on a scroll, his expression filled with anger, Lyle found himself immersed in a dream, recalling memories of his bygone days. As he peeked through the door, he saw his father confronting his grandfather. Lyle's grandfather was always dragging him to places like this again, while his father demanded to know if his grandfather intended to turn his grandson into a repairman. The tension escalated as Lyle's father shouted that he had no intention of allowing his son to become a repairman. He criticized his grandfather for holding himself up in the workshop and working tirelessly, expressing that his grandfather never cared for the family's feelings or for his mother. With a final declaration that the best repairman in the capital could kiss his foot, Lyle's father stormed out. After he left, Lyle watched his grandfather mutter words of regret, lamenting that he had not changed at all. It was then that Lyle woke up, realizing it was just a dream. However, today was significant. He would be meeting with the king. As Lyle bowed before the king, one knee on the ground and a ha and D on his chest, he commented that receiving a visit from the king must be a sign of another fine day. Asha, kneeling beside him with her hand on her chest to demonstrate allegiance, whispered to Lyle that what he just said was definitely not the appropriate way to address the king. The king responded with a loud laugh, his well-aged figure adorned with white hair, a beard, and a mustache. He told Lyle that he didn't need to be so formal when addressing him as a repairman, smiling as he spoke. This made Lyle laugh out loud, scratching his hair nervously as cold beads of sweat formed on his face. He thought to himself that he never imagined it would be easier to talk to the mighty king of the kingdom, and that a day would come when the king himself would refuse to see him in person. At the king's side stood Fran, royally dressed in a luxurious robe. The king commented that rumors of a famous repairman in the royal capital had been circulating around the castle. Lyle knew these rumors to be true. He had been receiving more noble clients recently and was thrilled about it. However, standing before the king still made him nervous as beads of sweat continued to form on his face. The king continued, noting that he had also heard that Lyle had been very good to his daughter, Fran. He explained that he had a request to make of Lyle, asking him to hear him out first. Curious, Lyle asked what needed repairs. The king pointed to an ancient scroll, declaring that it was this item that seemed to be in need of repair. Upon seeing the scroll, Lyle's face lit up in shock as he contemplated whether it was truly the legendary item he had heard about. The king elaborated, revealing that the item was the holy scripture of the Church of St. Lugnica. Confirming it to be the original copy, Lyle, astonished, commented that St. Lugnica was the religion the ancient elves believed in. Asking the king if he was indeed correct about this, the king responded affirmatively, confirming that it was indeed correct. He explained that it was the belief held by the ancient elves hundreds of years ago, making it the oldest religion to exist in the kingdom of Elta. The king continued, elaborating that this scripture was written in the ancient elvish alphabet, wherein the letters themselves possessed magic. He described how if someone were to say the word flame aloud, that person could produce fire. And if the word ice were spoken, the surrounding air would freeze. Even someone without any magic could activate the power of ancient spells like a miracle. The king lamented that the ancient elves had died out long ago and their tongue had become a phantom language. He called Lyle by name, addressing him as Repairman Lyle, and expressed his desire to ask Lyle to repair this ancient elven scripture. Lyle felt shock and nervousness wash over him at the weight of such a request. Cold beads of sweat trickling rapidly down his chin. He hesitated, questioning if the king was truly sure about entrusting such an important scripture to him. The king explained that someone had attempted to repair it decades ago, but as one could see, its current state was far from good. He stressed that in order to preserve the nation's cultural heritage and research the mysteries of ancient magic within, the original copy must be maintained regularly. Lyle replied that he would need to decipher the ancient elvish alphabet to repair it. Before he could finish, the king interrupted him, assuring him not to worry. He signaled for someone to enter, and a young man stepped in, introducing himself as Tylu. A hand on his chest as a sign of respect, he expressed his pleasure in making Lyle's acquaintance. Tylu explained that he had come from the village of elves to assist Lyle with his repairs, stating that starting today, he would help Lyle decipher the scripture until the repairs were complete. Lyle and Asha were astonished to see an elf for the first time, unable to help but stare at the sophisticated figure before them, neatly dressed. The king called Lyle's attention, asking if he would accept the request. Though nervous as evident from the cold beads of sweat on his face, Lyle acquiesced to the king. Afterward, he left with Asha and Chalu. Once they were gone, Fran challenged her father, questioning what he was thinking. The king asked what Fran meant, and she insisted he should not try to hide it, pleading with him not to say he didn't know. She expressed her belief that her father had a different reason for choosing Lyle, asking if she wasn't right. The king took a deep breath, sighing as he considered her words. He admitted that he had given Lyle a little test. As he stood up with his staff, he thought to himself that he wanted to see what that man's grandson was capable of, referencing Lyle's grandfather. Lyle was hard at work in his workshop, diligently focusing on the scripture of the elves. With a nose cover in place, he used his brush and tools to carve. Fully remove the dirt from the book's cover. As he labored over the ancient scripture, the king's words about the mysterious elvish alphabet echoed in his mind. He recalled hearing that this ancient magic had been largely replaced by modern practices, leaving only a handful of scholars still researching it. Lyle mused that if he could successfully repair the scripture, perhaps he might witness the ancient magic activated by the alphabet at least once. By now, Lyle had managed to repair part of the binding, but he knew that achieving a perfect finish would require assistance. Chalu, his elven assistant, observed Lyle's focused expression and suggested a break, beaming as he offered a cup of tea he had prepared. Lyle agreed, appreciating the idea, and they settled down to enjoy their tea. Chalu then asked how the repairs were progressing. Lyle responded that the binding could be repaired fairly easily, but he anticipated challenges with the interior, noting that the letters had faded significantly. He warned that it might take a bit longer until Tulu could lend a hand. Tulu, with a grim expression, acknowledged the truth of Lyle's assessment, knowing that the bookworm bites were particularly damaging. Curious, he asked Lyle where he had learned his repair techniques. Lyle clarified that Tulu was asking about his mentor, to which Tulu confirmed, expressing surprise that Lyle was so young yet already owned a shop, and had received a request directly from the king to repair the elf scripture. Chalu added that Lyle must be a very talented person indeed, smiling broadly as he spoke. Lyle was taken aback by the well-placed compliments, feeling a bit overwhelmed. He replied to Chalu, downplaying his skills, stating that he didn't think he was all that impressive. Lyle explained that his mentor had been his grandfather, also a skilled repairman, who had passed away when Lyle was young. Many of his memories of his grandfather were vague. Tulu, eager to know more, gently pressed Lyle, asking if he would share stories about his grandfather. Lyle was shocked by the request, his jaw dropping and eyes widening in surprise. He asked if Tulu truly wanted to hear about him. Although he felt the stories might not be all that interesting, he agreed to share what he could. Lyle began reminiscing that this atelier was something he had inherited from his grandfather. In the past, he would often visit his grandfather while he worked, pretending to be a repairman himself. Chalu asked if that was the reason Lyle had chosen to become a repairman as well. Lyle nodded, saying that his grandfather's name was well known throughout the capital at the time. He had learned all the techniques and knowledge necessary to be a repairman from his grandfather, whose legacy inspired him to pursue this craft. Lyle reflected on the valuable lessons his grandfather had imparted, particularly emphasizing that the most vital thing for a repairman is to develop a close relationship with the client. As he spoke, he held the scripture of the elves in his hands, a broad smile lighting up his face as he gazed at the ancient text. He expressed that the essence of a repairman's role lies in weaving together the thoughts and feelings embodied in an object. Lyle elaborated that regardless of the item, it always carries a history and holds the memories of the time spent with the client. Tulu, sipping his tea, commented that emotions are often visible to the eye, but can differ from person to person, making the task of understanding them quite challenging. Lyle, swept away by his storytelling, closed his eyes, recalling his grandfather's wisdom. He noted that it took his grandfather a long time to grasp this important lesson. Meanwhile, Tulu continued to sip his tea with a blank expression, prompting Lyle to apologize for rambling. He confessed that he didn't often get the chance to discuss such topics. Tulu, still maintaining his blank demeanor, set his teacup down and reassured Lyle that it was no problem. He then apologized for prying into Lyle's past. Lyle, initially bothered by Tilo's expression, found humor in Tilo's apology and laughed, saying it was perfectly fine. He added that since he couldn't read ancient Elvish, having someone like Tilo to help understand the emotions the elves poured into the scripture was very reassuring. With a spark of excitement, Lyle expressed his determination to do everything in his power to repair the scripture, requesting Toulouse's assistance. Toulouse, wearing a more serious expression now, agreed, but Lyle couldn't help but notice the shift in Toulouse's demeanor, which made him wonder what was troubling his friend. Lyle, eager to lighten the mood, asked Toulouse about his hometown, expressing a desire to learn more about elven history and culture. He indicated that he was genuinely interested in Toulouse's background if he didn't mind sharing. Chalu replied affirmatively, but suddenly recalled some business he needed to attend to. He stood up, preparing to leave, and apologized for delaying Lyle's work. He promised to share more about himself another time before walking away, disappearing into the shadows of an alley. Once Chalu was gone, he couldn't shake off the anger that bubbled inside him, muttering about Lyle's remarks regarding getting close to clients as the grandson of the deplorable repairman. After Chalu departed, Lyle remarked to himself that Toulouse seemed in an odd mood, piquing his curiosity about what might be bothering him as he returned his focus to the scripture of the elves, flipping through the pages for further assessment. He discovered that one page was torn, both sides of it were blank, with no signs of any page having been inserted later. Lyle remembered that the king had mentioned someone who had attempted to repair this book several decades ago, which made him wonder how such an important document had come to be in this condition. He thought about his grandfather, recalling that he had repaired something similar before, and decided to delve into the journal of his grandfather's works. As he sifted through the shelf of records, he hoped to find hints on how to fix the scripture of the elves. Maybe his grandfather had undertaken a similar repair in the past. While going through the collection of his grandfather's work, he stumbled upon a book titled Dictionary that caught his attention. Numerous notes protruded from its pages, and when he opened it, he was shocked to discover that the book contained ancient Elvish text. A bookmark nestled within the pages drew him further in. Upon opening to the middle, he found a diary entry detailing an absurd request made to his grandfather regarding the repair of an impressive old book. The diary noted that this old book was not just any book, but a scripture of the elves. Lyle learned that his grandfather had been told people placed their confidence in Laud as the best repairman in the capital. The request originated from the country itself, prompting his grandfather to boast arrogantly about being underestimated. He fastened his work apron, confidently proclaiming that there was nothing in the world that the best repairman Laud could not fix. However, when he opened the scripture, he expressed frustration at being unable to read the content and commented on how ridiculous the request seemed. Laud dismissively remarked on the value of such a mysterious book, crossing his legs over the table as he sighed. Just then, an elven lady caught his attention, politely asking if she could speak with him. Surprised that anyone would be there at that hour, he turned to the lady and inquired about her presence. She introduced herself as Eliza, smiling warmly and mentioning that she had traveled from the village of Alavis. She revealed that she had come to assist Laud at the request of the village chief. Laud was taken aback at the sight of an elven lady before him, but his arrogance remained intact as he asked if this were true. Eliza affirmed it and he scratched his head, feigning understanding while trying to suppress a laugh. Eliza attempted to discuss the repairs, but Laud interrupted, asserting that this was a job he had accepted and would complete on his own. When she questioned what he meant, he explained that seeking help would tarnish his reputation as a repairman. Eliza's frustration mounted as she asked him what he meant by tarnish. Laud insisted with growing confidence that he was the best repairman in the royal capital and even an entire world. Eliza asked if Laud would truly be able to restore the feelings associated with the scripture. Confused, Laud inquired what she meant by feelings. She explained that the scriptures of the elves had been passed down among them for hundreds of years, containing the teachings of Saint Lunica, whom their ancestors revered. She emphasized that the scripture also encompassed their culture, lifestyle, history, and past ways of thinking, all encapsulated within the pages of this book. Eliza pointed out that, especially now that the elves were a dwindling race, this scripture left behind by their ancestors was a precious artifact that needed preservation for the future. She cautioned him that handling the pages would be difficult without an understanding of the ancient Elvish alphabet, stressing that he could not restore the book to its original state without that knowledge. Laud responded with an overly confident laugh, displaying his teeth as he insisted it was simple. He claimed that if he restored it to how it was before, then there wouldn't be any problems to solve. Eliza looked at him with disgust at his dismissive words. He stared back, wondering what she meant by feelings, muttering to himself that human emotions were not something that could be repaired. To him, it didn't matter if he didn't grasp the meanings behind the letters and words. As long as he could restore the physical shapes of items, that was WH. It mattered. He thought the elf lady was foolish for talking about repairing feelings. Besides, this was a request from the king himself, and as he stood over the old book, the scripture of the elves, he convinced himself that completing this job would establish him as the best repairman in the nation. He reassured himself confidently that there was nothing he couldn't do. However, as he began the repairs, he accidentally tore a page, shocking both himself and Eliza. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the precious scriptures page of her race sustain damage as the content of the page fades away. In despair, she fell to her knees, frozen by the enormity of the loss. Laud rushed to her side, urging her not to worry and insisting that everything would be fine, stating that he was the best repairman in the royal capital. He reassured her that the book could be fixed, but as the book began to fade, both Laud and Eliza's eyes widened in horror. Eliza started to cry helplessly, lamenting that it was too late to do anything. She had placed her faith in Laud, but now, with her precious history deteriorating, she questioned what he had done. In that moment, Lyle realized the weight of his pride and arrogance, understanding too late how important people's feelings were. He felt like a fool for failing to grasp their significance until the damage was done. As Lyle read his grandfather's regretful reflections on how he had failed to recognize the importance of certain things until it was too late, he noted that his grandfather referred to himself as a big fool. With each line he read from the diary, Lyle felt the weight of his grandfather's grave mistake. He realized that he needed to take action regarding his grandfather's misstep, understanding that letting it end on such a sorrowful note would be wrong. He reassured himself that he would handle the rest for his grandfather. At the same time, Tio flashed back to a memory with Eliza, recalling how she had shown him the scripture of the elves. She had smiled brightly, claiming that within the books lay magic capable of bringing happiness to many people, her cheeks flushing with excitement. Small Tio had asked if she was genuinely talking about happiness and magic. Eliza had confirmed it, explaining that the book's age might have diminished its magical power. She shared that in the past, the trees they were observing had apparently used the magic written in the scriptures to bloom beautiful peach-colored flowers. She added that it was said this magic calmed many hearts, ending the feud between humans and demi-humans and leading everyone to happiness. Eliza continued, saying that there was a famous repairman in the royal capital who could restore any object, regardless of its condition, to its original state. Tio beamed with happiness, feeling that this meant Eliza was going to the royal capital to bring smiles back to everyone's faces. Eliza smiled back, expressing her hope that the repairman could restore the scripture of the elves so that flowers could bloom from the tree once again. She then asked Tio to wait for her. However, Tio recalled the painful day Eliza returned to the village, her spirit broken. Everyone tried to console her, but she rejected their efforts, believing it was all her fault. She cried day and night, holding what remained of the scripture, always apologizing for its loss. Tylo sat at the table, rage bubbling within him, thinking that humans age and die quickly, forsaking the sins they commit. As he pondered these thoughts, Lyle entered, calling Tylo's attention. He expressed his desire to borrow Tylo's strength, stating that he understood everything, from the scripture of the elves to what his grandfather had done. Tio stood up with an angry, gloomy expression, finding Lyle's request unbelievable. He pointed out that Lyle was the repairman's grandchild, yet here he was relying on his client. It struck Tio as laughable, reinforcing his belief that it would always end up the same way. He thought about how the same situation had happened to Eliza, observing Tio's gloomy and angry demeanor. Lyle realized that this was the feeling he had sensed from Tio since their first meeting. It dawned on him that Tio had come here fully aware of everything that had transpired before. Lyle asked Tio if he had come to make his grandfather Laud atone for the wrongs he had committed. With a stern expression, Tio confirmed that this was indeed his intention. He recounted how the kingdom of Elta had notified them about the request to restore the scripture of the elves, saying that at last, it felt like the time for his revenge had come. He emphasized that after Laud had done what could not be undone, he had left this world without ever atoning for his misdeeds. Tio then posed a question to Lyle, asking what he thought had happened to Eliza after that incident. He explained that Eliza's life had changed for the worse from that day. Forward, it had become her duty to repair the scripture, and she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for what had transpired. The inconceivable guilt had destroyed her spirit, and he lamented that he had not seen her smile since. He expressed to Lyle that his grandfather had ruined a person's life, robbing them of their hopes and happiness. Tio declared that Laud had stolen everything from the elven people. As Tio spoke with such fury and rage, Lyle began to truly understand the extent of his grandfather's wrongdoings. He realized that Laud's actions had caused great suffering for numerous individuals, amplifying the magnitude of his grandfather's regrets. In a fit of anger, Tio shouted at Lyle, accusing him of being no different from his grandfather. He screamed at the top of his lungs, asserting that Lyle was not undertaking this work for any reason other than his own prestige and hubris. Tio pointed out that Lyle did not attempt to understand his client's thoughts at all, declaring that for Lyle to repair the scripture would be utterly impossible. Before Tio could finish his statement, Lyle shouted back, calling his name to demand Tio's undivided attention. The anger and seriousness in Lyle's tone shocked and frightened Tio, causing him to stand still. Lyle told Tio that his grandfather had truly committed an act that could not be rectified, acknowledging that no matter how much he regretted his grandfather's actions, it wouldn't change what had happened to Eliza or to Tio and his people. Lyle bowed his head, expressing his genuine sorrow while holding the scripture of the elves in his hands. He admitted that he knew an apology alone would not be enough for Tio to forgive him. He understood that the time for both Eliza and Tio would never return. Hearing Lyle's heartfelt words left Tylo shocked. Lyle continued, saying that even so, just this once he wanted Tylo to believe in him. In the back of his mind, he knew that the mistake his grandfather had made could only be fixed by him. Lyle continued, explaining that at the time, his grandfather was unable to fulfill the job of repairing the scripture of the elves. However, within his grandfather's diary were clues left behind that would help him accomplish this task. Tylo warned Lyle that if he made even a small mistake while interpreting the ancient elven characters, they would disappear. He insisted that restoring them based solely on appearance would not suffice, yelling at Lyle that he must grasp the true meaning behind each word. Lyle acknowledged Tio's concerns, affirming that this was indeed true. He expressed his need for Tio's strength for the final step in restoring the scripture, stating that to mend the pages, he required someone like Tio who understood ancient elven characters. With a gloomy and angry expression, Tio asked why Lyle was pursuing this endeavor. Lyle responded by saying he wanted to accomplish what his grandfather could not, to restore the scripture of the elves while preserving its meaning and returning it to the elves. He emphasized that he wanted to bring hope back to the elves once again, adding that he did not want Tio to be stuck in the past any longer. Hearing this, Tio was moved to tears and replied that he believed in Lyle and in Lyle's grandfather once more. Sometime later, Lyle and Asha were seen discussing whether Lyle had handed over the finished scripture of the elves yet. Lyle informed Asha that the problem was notifying the king that he was done. Asha assured him that she would accompany him, suggesting that they should ask the king for favorable rewards, given the circumstances of the job and the fact that the scriptures originally belonged to the elves. Lyle was excited by Asha's suggestion, and he expressed his gratitude, thanking her for her help and saying that she was a great support.